Hi, we're on episode number 46 of the Tomato Timer, and I'm excited to welcome on my podcast another podcast host, Justin Nguyen. He's the founder of Get Your Grind Up, a media company helping students navigate their life through college, and also the host of a iTunes Top 100 podcast, the Declassified College podcast, where he unlocks cheat codes to thriving in college in bite-sized episodes. With over 7 million viewers, that's amazing. Justin, it's really good to have you. How are you?
Thank you so much. No, thank you for having me. I'm doing well.
It's great to hear. I want to like kick it right off by first finding out what led you to launch the classified college. What was the kind of the trigger really?
Yeah, so with Declassified College goes all the way back to the start of Get Your Grind Up.
Mm,
Really, Get Your Grind Up started when I was in college, and the whole purpose of that was to really showcase to my friends and the people that were following me at the time that I was putting in the work to get these good grades and these internships. I wasn't just like naturally smart or anything. I would come home from work, study, and showcase my study tips as well as my networking tips. And that started
mm,
to kind of blow up a little bit. And that led us to our first show, the Get Your Grind Up show. And what we found with that show was it was a long form, 45 to an hour long interview show, typically like what you think of most podcasts. And that was great from our end, in terms of like we got to meet a bunch of really cool people, anywhere from like influencers with millions of followers to entrepreneurs who have raised millions of VC funding. But from the perspective of things, it wasn't that great, right? There's not many Gen Zers that will listen to a 45-minute long
yeah.
podcast episode, which I'm assuming is sort of like the reason why you have your show
Yeah.
around the 25-minute mark.
Yeah.
Um, so we took all that data and we sat back and like, how can we create a show that's specific for students? And that's where Declassified College kind of came about. And the whole thinking behind Declassified was we have all of these insights from my personal journey and students all around the world through my LinkedIn following. How can we find a way to incorporate all of them into short episodes to
Mhm.
showcase this knowledge to students around the world? And that's where we came up with our show. And the whole concept behind the show is we want to take the concept of a vlog, which many Gen Z people are sort of used to watching, and how
Mhm.
there's different characters in each episode. And those are the different students that we showcase their tips and tricks on each of our episodes.
It's awesome. I've listened to a couple episodes and it's very addictive as well. It's so quick and easy. Just go from one to another. Yeah, yep, yep. That makes sense. I can definitely see the kind of the charm or the attraction behind having super short but very insightful piece of advice in very short periods of time. Um, I guess the reason behind it was obviously your college journey, and your current kind of choices that you've gone through to get where you are, which has led to so many of those kind of experiences and insights that you share. So I guess what are the major challenges while students are navigating through college, through university, and even through high school, to be honest?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like you just don't know what you don't know.
Mm,
And especially growing up with a very stereotypical Asian background, like I trusted my parents with everything, right? I thought everything that they said, they knew the world.
yeah,
So like growing up, I was kind of forced down the path to like become a doctor, engineer, lawyer, yada yada yada.
yeah,
I said no to that and ended up graduating with a finance degree. But during that time, I believed them in the way that it's like, hey, you need to get good grades in high school, you get into a
mm,
good college, get good grades in college, and you'll get an internship. And that's just what I thought would happen. So,
mm,
like my freshman year of college, I had like a near 4.0. And then the next step was, okay, let's try to find internships. So I
mhm,
applied to like 50 plus. I was like, oh, I'm going to get an internship just like that. There's no reason why Google won't hire me, Facebook won't hire me, whoever it may be. And I got rejected by every single one. Like I didn't even get an interview, like just straight up rejection. And I was like, what the heck is going on? And then like fast forward to when I graduated, I had 5 internships, 3 at Fortune 500 companies, and I had sort of figured out these cheat codes from a lot of my own personal trial and error. So my whole thing is a lot of these students they struggle to land that first internship experience, which is ultimately the really hard one to land. Once you land one, typically you know the process to land more.
yeah.
um, I think that what we are providing is career advice, but in a fun way. That's very different than the career advice that you would get from like your career service. The
Yeah.
information is the same, but the execution is completely different.
You're absolutely right. There's so much misconception, and I'd even say misinformation, surrounding the university and the job market. Unfortunately, like we love our parents, but the knowledge and that they or the experiences that they've had is very very different to what's happening right now. And I really do want to dive into this kind of employability piece with you as well. Um, but I've faced similar challenges, and I've it's crazy, but you find that like the power of networking, the power of speaking to people, uh, it kind of like opens up so many more doors for you um, than having like an incredible CV. Grades are just like one stepping stone to it all. And I think this brings me to kind of my next question and topic of discussion, which is around personal brands. I've started to realize the value, but it sometimes might not be, I don't know, as relevant for a student to think about their personal brand, even at the age of like, 16, 17. Tell me about like your journey about building your own brand, and why is it important for students to be considering this as well?
Yeah, I mean, you have to look at it from a numbers perspective, right? If
Mhm.
you look at things from a grand scheme of things, the law of averages, you're going to be an average, right? You're an average student. And if you think that you're an above average student, let's just say you're an above average student at your college, there's probably numerous above average students from all of the thousands of other colleges around the US that have similar grades as you, similar
Yeah.
internship experience as you, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at that, it's like what actually makes a difference by the time that you graduate. And it's you as a personality at the end of the day. If you have the same resume, the same experience, the same GPA as the person that's graduating from UC Berkeley, what's the
Hmm.
difference between you and them? The difference is going to be how you've portrayed yourself to the person that's hiring you. And to me, there's nothing more powerful than if your resume pops up on a recruiter's table or whatever, and they're looking through it and they're like, "Oh, I remember Justin Nguyen," or "Oh, I remember Zubar," right? Because they saw your content on LinkedIn, or
Yeah.
you've reached out to them previously and had a coffee chat with them, whatever
Yeah.
it may be. So that to me is ultimately the power of personal branding. And we actually had an episode with this guy who he had applied to Tesla like 3 or 4 different times in the past, and I don't think he ever got an interview for the job. But then he created a LinkedIn article about how Tesla is changing his mindset on like gas vehicles, like vehicles that use gas or
Hmm.
something. And he's like that stereotypical like truck driving type of guy. That article went a little viral. The head recruiter at Tesla found it, reached out to him and was like, "Hey, have you ever thought about applying to Tesla?" And he's like, "Yeah, I've applied like several times before, just never heard back, or I always got like rejected." And he's like, "Oh, apply again." And he ended up getting the Tesla job
Wow.
because the recruiter finally found out who this person is. And I think half of the battle, or probably more than half of the battle when it comes to internships and jobs, is does the person on the other end know who you are? Because if they do, then it becomes a much easier decision for them to make.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, and it's actually like similar experiences that I've had as well. And it feels a little bit weird. And I think one thing to note, I'm sure you faced it as well, but there will be doors which close. There will be like messages that you send and you won't get responses to, and it's a little bit hard to feel that, like, are you getting ignored? But it's like going past all of those kind of closed doors, and the one that opens up is kind of incredible for you to pursue. um what about like, I want to kind of unpack this a little bit more. How do we, like, what are the aspects of a personal brand? How do you bring out your interests, your passion, your values into something, into this kind of like entity that you want to show off?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to personal brands, a lot of people just think too hard about it, and they probably think like, "Oh, I like anime. Like, who else likes anime?" Or,
Mhm.
"Oh, I like sports cards. Who else in the world would like sports cards?" And what we found is because of the internet, let's just say you might be the only person in your town that likes that. Let's just say you're the only person in your town that likes sports cards or whatever it is. But on the internet, there are millions of other people that like that same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And when you think about hiring, a lot of students think like, "Oh, I need to have the skills to pay the bills, or I need to have a degree to get this job." And yes, that's sort of like checking the boxes. You definitely need that. But the ultimate differentiator is can that recruiter, can that hiring manager, can that manager that you're going to be working with,
Hmm.
do they see themselves being able to work with you for 30, 40, 60 hours a week? right?
Yes.
Because they can teach you how to do Microsoft Excel. They can teach you how to code. Hopefully, they don't have to, but they could if they wanted to.
Mm.
What they can't teach you is to be a good person and to like the same things that they like, to be able to have a conversation with them. And that's what people forget. And let's just say you like Pokemon, but then the other person also likes Pokemon. And during your interview, you somehow turn that conversation into talking about Pokemon and how it's like their 25th anniversary this year. I can almost guarantee you that you've won that interview because
Yeah.
that person sees that you can have a conversation with them outside of the work complex, but then you can also do the job. Hopefully you have that part.
Mm. I think that the term that comes to my mind is empathy. The fact that you can kind of humanize, and that's a challenge with resumes, right? You get a Word doc, which is a bunch of words essentially, right? It has nothing, no characteristics. So let's say we go down the pathway of building up some sort of personal brand. We somehow get ourselves connected to the right people. We build our network. We land ourselves an interview. Um, what do we do then? How do we? And I think you kind of started mentioning some stuff, but it's like in our brains, like it's a similar kind of thing that we're thinking that they want to assess our skills, but what should we really be trying to show off during a conversation where a recruiter's like, what are they looking for really?
Yeah, I mean, for me, right? If you think about it, if you don't have the skills when it comes to by the time you get to the interview, you're not going to be able to learn it a week before the interview, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So I'm not going to be able to teach you how to code within a week. You're probably not going to be able to teach yourself how to code within a week. You put yourself in a bad situation by trying to apply to a job
yeah.
where you don't have the skills. What I do think people can learn how to do on quick notice is finding different ways to connect with whoever they're talking to on the other side.
Mm,
Um, I personally, whenever I go into interviews, and I think I had a pretty good record of interviews when I was interviewing with like internships and jobs.
mm,
Um, I always try to find a point of connection where whether it was talking about my struggles of trying to find internships, figuring out how to find them, and then now I created content and that related to the person that was hiring me. They're like,
mm.
"Oh my god, I totally remember being a college student, like how hard
Yeah,
that was." And then you can talk more about that. Or like I'm from originally from the small state of Connecticut, and I always ask where people are from to see if I know like a random fact from that state. But especially if they say that they're from Connecticut, I start listing out some random things that I know about the state of like, oh, what's your favorite pizza place? Because people in Connecticut love pizza. Or talking about like my journey playing soccer and some of the towns that I went to. Like all these different sort of connecting points are things that make people feel good about themselves because that you're talking to because they feel like they're part of the conversation. If you're
mm,
just talking about yourself the whole time of like, oh, I'm so good at coding, or I knew how to connect point A to point B when it comes to like project management or whatever it is, that's great. But you were supposed to already know that by the
yeah,
time you
yeah,
get to that interview. That interview is really, for the most part, unless it's like a skills interview, to see if you actually fit with the team and the culture of the company.
yeah. My mentor says something, and it kind of relates to what you just talked about. He says that actually it was in a book I read recently, which is that when you introduce yourself to someone, and this was kind of in the context of a networking event, always introduce yourself with three things. So, for example, you just don't walk in and say, "Hey, I'm the founder of ZNotes." You say, "Hey, I'm the founder of ZNotes. I'm a runner, and I like to read a lot." And suddenly, you've made three distinctive kind of connection points, and that's three times more than just introducing yourself through a very narrow lens. Um, and as you said, the most effective conversations and kind of relationships I've built are often not to do with work at all. I'm still thinking about the networking context, but you start talking about a topic, and you suddenly like are connecting on a personal level, with a story that they can tell you about, or kind of or a fact, or as you just said. So it makes a lot of sense to be building that human connection as you're going through this interview stage. Um, I want to kind of continue this bit where we've gone through the kind of building ourselves into a more personable brand when we go into applying. We got to the interview stage. Um, I guess just discussing the job market a little bit. It's changing so much, especially under these kind of pandemic times. What do you think about it in general right now?
Yeah. So one quick add-on to the interview stage, and then we can talk
Mm,
more about the job. I just didn't want to interrupt you. When it comes to the interview, I always say you want to be remembered.
Mhm.
And an example for that, right? This is episode 46 of your show.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I ask you for your guest list, you probably can't list out all 46 people that you've had on. If you can, you have amazing memory. But chances are you probably don't. And
Yeah.
there's probably like 5 to maybe 10 people that really come to mind when I ask you for your guest list.
Mhm.
Those people have probably found a way to really connect with you, whether it's something that you really enjoy learning about, or they found a way to finesse the conversation to talking about something that you like.
Yeah.
And
That
you
makes a
now
lot of sense.
remember them for
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. I
right?
do.
That's
Yeah.
the same thing that you want to do for an interview. I'm sure these people are interviewing 5, 10, 15 people for that same role as you. What you want to do is make a lasting impression so that when they're thinking about who they want to hire for that position, you
Mhm.
come up top of mind. Now, that can be some of the answers the way that you answer some questions. That can be how you finesse the conversation into your favor and talk about things that you both want to talk about.
Mhm.
Or that can be like asking great questions that people have never asked before. And that's something that I used to always do is I would always end the interview with this question of, hey, like I'm new to interviewing and I always want to learn more about like better questions that I can ask during an interview. What is a question that you wish that I would have asked you? And literally the response every
Yeah.
time that you ask a recruiter that is going to be this silence because they're stunned, right? And then the next one is like like awkward laugh. And then, you know, give me a second to think about that. And if they give you a second to think about it, that means you've done a good job because you've asked good questions.
Yeah.
Now, if they come back very quickly, then you know you've messed up, and that's something that you can keep as a note, as a mental note in the back of your head. But then you ask them to answer whatever question that they tell you to ask. Keep that, like write down that as a note, and then
Mhm.
follow up with that saying like, oh, thank you so much for that question that you gave me. I'm going to make sure that if I ever do interview anywhere else that I'm going to use that question. It was something that I never thought about.
Yeah.
And now you've just solidified your memory in that person's head.
That's a very, very smart trick. I can see why you call it cheat codes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's again just something very simple that you can add
Yeah.
on to the end of your interview to be remembered. That's
Yeah.
why people send the follow up with like the note cards and everything like that. It's so that your name comes top of mind when people are thinking about who's right for this job.
Mm. So yeah, incredible. I'm gonna kind of like transition us to the job market and just kind of first of all, what are your feelings as we kind of come out of the pandemic? I'm not sure 100%, but what's the situation like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in Orlando, Florida, and I graduated from UCF, and UCF is like the number one hospitality school in the US or like top
Mhm.
5 all the
Yeah.
time. And hospitality got crushed over the
Yeah.
past
Yeah.
year and a half. So I have a lot of friends that are looking for jobs because they can't find a job right now. Um, my advice to people is you have to realize that your skills aren't just in whatever industry that you got your degree in. For instance, with
Mhm.
hospitality, right? Hospitality isn't hiring. What is? Tech. What are the main skills that you learn in hospitality? Customer service and being able to deal with customers at a massive level, right? Whether you're working at a resort, at one of the theme parks, anything like that. How did that transfer to an industry that is hiring, like tech? Customer success, customer success roles. So these people are the people that are in charge of making sure that if you're a school and you purchase a Zoom licensing program, that you're able to walk through that customer from point A to point B,
Yeah.
so that they utilize their Zoom license properly.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the same skills that you would do while working at a resort, but at
Yeah.
a tech level.
That makes a lot of sense. So to capture that is essentially that you must remember that the skills that you're learning in a certain degree aren't restricted to a certain industry. Um, I was lucky enough. I studied math, so it was so abstract that I can like kind of apply it to everything. Um, but it just seems like such a smart way of approaching it. Like just almost like decoupling um, things and just looking at the applicability of certain skills. So while we're talking about this, I'm kind of curious what you think because when I came out of university, I was a little bit overwhelmed, even during actually, whether to go down internship routes, and if I do go down taking an intern role, would it be at should we be targeting like startups, or should we be targeting um, existing large corporations?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it really depends on it's a case by case
Mhm.
scenario, right? If you want to take a risk and you want to try to join an early startup, I mean, there's massive upside there. I'm sure the early employees of Airbnb aren't complaining
Yeah.
that they took a later like a lower salary at the beginning to now get the payoff that they just got with their IPO. Is that a risk that you're willing to take? That's up to you. For me personally, my thoughts around this are you're 22 to 25 when you're graduating typically. You have some time to take some risks if you don't have a family to provide for. Why not? Why not risk it? What happens? That company shuts down. As long as you're building that personal brand, then you'll
Mhm.
be able to find one very like another job very quickly. And a quick example of that is I have a friend that never graduated college. I think he dropped out after his freshman year, and he was super interested in the marketing side of things. So throughout since he graduated in freshman year, it's been about 4 years, and he's been slowly building his personal brand on Twitter since then. And it's not like he has a massive personal brand. He has like 3 or 4 thousand followers or something like that. But he texted me like in December, so in the middle of pandemic, and he was like, "Dude, I think I'm gonna leave my job." I was like, "What do you mean you're gonna leave your job in the middle of pandemic?" He's like, "Yeah, I just don't like the work that we're doing. Like the new year, new me. I'm gonna start something new." I was like, "Okay, sure. Kudos to you. Good luck." After he quits his job, he sends out a tweet of like, "Hey everyone, I'm gonna be a free agent. If anyone you know that's looking in the e-commerce world, hit me up." Within a week, he had like 10 interviews, and he ended up taking a
Wow.
job and doubled his salary. That's the power
Yeah.
of like building up a personal brand. I forgot what the initial question was, but I think that answers that initial
Yes, yeah,
question as
it was
well.
more like the kind of the comparison between like interning at a big corporation with like
Yeah.
grad teams or anything like that, or going for like more of a startup type approach.
Yeah,
Um,
I think if you want structure, then definitely go more corporate. But if you're someone that if I ask you to do something and you're like, okay, bet I'll Google it, then startup is your move. If you're someone where I say, hey, go do this, and you're like, okay, how do I do it? Give me X, Y, Z. Then corporate is probably more of your route.
yeah, that's a very simple way of classifying that. One thing I wanted to kind of add myself is that while you're going through these kind of startup or any kind of journey, it's everything that you do, creating assets for yourself to contribute to your personal brand is so powerful. So this interview, or any kind of podcast you enter, or blog post you write, or Twitter tweets that you send out, these are all kind of contributing to your overall imagery that the world sees. And when you get to the stage, as your friend you just told us about, who just basically doubled his salary, you get to that point, you suddenly have a bunch of people who've been watching your journey, who've been seeing you transform, even if it's actually huge, like 360 degree, or well, not 360, but 180-degree turns, changing your perspective completely or pivoting. It's still being part of that journey leads you to kind of having that, again, that same personable, human, interactable connection. Um, we're getting closer to the end of the episode. It's a bit longer than yours, but we're still quite tight. And I would like to kind of look at the kind of the past few weeks and months of your kind of your podcast show, and ask you, what was one of that cheat code that really like kind of stands out for you?
Yeah, so we just did a whole season on productivity where we
Mhm.
brought on students and we brought on like YouTubers that sort of are in the productivity space. And this is something that I started at the beginning of the year. I didn't know that there was like a name for it, but after talking to these individuals, there's a name for it called time blocking.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but it's sort of very similar to the Pomodoro technique. But basically, before I would kind of go with the flow, right? So I'd do some editing here, some content production here, some emails there. And it was kind of all over the place.
Yeah.
What I've started to do now is most of my Mondays, my schedule is almost always clear. Um, Typically for me, that those are my creative days. Mondays for the whole day, and then Tuesday mornings. Tuesday afternoons are typically my meetings. So all of my meetings that I'll have is Tuesdays afternoons, and I almost never. This is sort of the exception. Almost never take meetings before 2 p.m. Eastern time,
Okay.
and that's because that's where my mind is usually most creative, and
Yeah.
that's when
Yeah.
I do that work. So that's sort of what has really helped me productivity wise is like time blocking and making sure things are on my schedule. I live by my schedule. If it's not on my schedule, I literally forget that it's a thing.
Well, that's a really, really powerful technique, something I've been kind of using as well. Thank you so much, Justin. It's been really, really fun to have you. Some really interesting cheat codes.
No, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thanks, man. Take care, and we'll talk to you later.
Peace.
Bye.